At my daughter's engagement party, 65 guests filled our Tennessee ranch, celebrating her wedding to the charming financial advisor she said had changed her life. Then, beneath the glowing string lights, she slipped beside me, gripped my arm, and whispered, "Dad, call 911. Right now." 4 words. No explanation. My smile never moved, but the former federal judge inside me knew something was terribly wrong. And at that moment, I knew it was time to act. I'm grateful you chose to be here today. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you joining from? Every response means something to me. Subscribe and hit the bell so stories like this always find you. Fictional elements have been woven in for storytelling and educational value. Names and locations are coincidental. The lesson at the heart of this, however, is worth carrying forward. I am 68 years old, and I have spent most of my life making judgments about people. 36 years on the federal bench will do that to you. You sit elevated above the courtroom floor, you watch people under oath, and you learn slowly, painfully, irreversibly, that deception rarely announces itself. It arrives dressed in a firm handshake and a reasonable explanation. It arrives with eye contact and a warm smile. It arrives looking exactly like the thing you most want to believe. I thought that education had made me immune. I was wrong. My name is Robert Callahan. I live on Cumberland River Ranch, 340 acres in Robertson County, Tennessee, about 40 miles north of Nashville. The property runs from the river's edge east toward a timberline of old-growth oak and hickory, with cattle pasture covering most of the middle ground. In the mornings, when the mist is still sitting low over the south field and the cattle are moving slow through the wet grass, it looks like something a painter invented. Eleanor always said it looked like God was showing off. Eleanor was my wife for 31 years. She passed away in the spring of 2022, 14 months after her diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer stage 3 by the time the doctors found it. The oncologist at Vanderbilt sat across from us in a small office with a box of tissues on the corner of his desk, and I remember thinking with the cold, detached clarity of a man who had spent decades absorbing bad news without flinching, that the tissues were a permanent fixture. That he placed them there every morning the way other people placed their coffee mugs. "How long?" I asked. The doctor looked at me, then at Eleanor, then back at me. "With aggressive treatment, possibly 18 months. Without it, 6 to 9. Eleanor reached over and put her hand on mine. Her fingers were warm. "Robert," she said quietly, "stop cross-examining the man. He's doing his job." Even then. Even in that office. She made me smile. We chose treatment. We fought for 14 months with everything modern medicine and Eleanor's considerable stubbornness could offer. She taught her last class at Robertson County High School in October of 2021, standing at the whiteboard in her reading glasses with chalk dust on her sleeve, refusing to leave until the semester ended. Her students didn't know she was sick. She didn't want their pity, she wanted their attention. That was Eleanor. The last weeks were at Vanderbilt. I drove down every morning before 6 and stayed until the nurses made me go home. Our daughter Diane flew in from Memphis every weekend, sleeping in the chair beside her mother's bed, holding her hand through the nights I couldn't be there. Diane is a cardiologist. She saves hearts for a living, and watching her sit helpless beside her mother's bed was one of the hardest things I have ever witnessed. On the 4th day of Eleanor's final week, she was awake for nearly an hour. Clearer than she had been in days. She looked at me with those steady brown eyes that had kept me honest for 31 years, and she asked me to promise her 2 things. "The first one is easy," she said. Her voice was thin, but her tone was firm. "Stop working 7 days a week. Stay at the ranch. Take care of those cattle. Live like a human being, Robert, not a federal employee. I promise, I said. My throat felt like it had been filled with concrete. Good. She squeezed my hand. The second one is harder to explain. I need you to trust, but verify. Always verify. She paused, and her eyes sharpened in the way they did when she was about to say something she had been thinking about for a long time, especially with Diane. I frowned. Eleanor, what do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. Her grip tightened. You spent 36 years reading people in that courtroom. Don't stop reading them just because they're sitting at your dinner table. Promise me. I thought she was talking about Diane's career, about the politics of hospital administration, about the kind of professional decisions a father might need to help navigate. It made sense to me in the way that things make sense when you are desperate to understand them. I promise, I said. She closed her eyes. Good man, she whispered. 3 days later, she was gone. In the months that followed, I kept the first promise. I stepped back from my remaining consulting work, handed off the last of my case reviews, and moved full-time to Cumberland Ranch. I learned the cattle operation from our ranch manager, Billy Tasker, a weathered 60-year-old from Coopertown, who had been running the property for 8 years and had approximately 0 patience for former federal judges who didn't know the difference between a stalker and a stalker. Billy set me straight on that within the first week. Diane visited often in the beginning. She helped me sort through Eleanor's things, pack up her classroom materials, organize the files her mother had kept in the small office off the kitchen. We worked mostly in silence, the two of us moving through the house like people navigating around something fragile and invisible. She was 32 years old, and suddenly without the woman who had been her compass. I watched her carry that weight with a steadiness that broke my heart. For a long time, I didn't understand Eleanor's second promise. Trust, but verify, especially with Diane. I turned it over in my mind during the long evenings on the porch, watching the cattle settle in the south pasture as the light faded over the timberline. I examined it from every angle a former judge and JAG officer could think of. I never found the answer. Not until the night Diane called me from Memphis, her voice carrying something I hadn't heard in years. Hope, February in Robertson County is the quiet month. The cattle are settled, the timber crews are between seasons, and the ranch holds itself in a kind of suspended stillness, waiting for the ground to soften and the first green to push through. I had been sitting at the kitchen table that Tuesday evening, with a cup of coffee and a stack of property tax documents, when my phone buzzed against the wood. Diane's name on the screen. She rarely called on weeknights, unless something was urgent. My chest tightened the way it still does 2 years after Eleanor. I haven't fully trained myself out of that reflex, that half-second of dread before I answer. I picked up on the second ring. Hey, sweetheart, everything okay? Yes. A pause. Then, actually, yes. More than okay, Dad. I set down my pen. Something in her voice made me sit up straighter. It was lighter than I had heard it in a long time. Not the careful, controlled lightness she used when she was managing stress at the hospital, but something genuine and unguarded. Something that reminded me of the way she used to sound on Christmas mornings when she was 9 years old. Tell me, I said. Yeah, I met someone. The words came out in a rush, like she had been holding them back, and finally let go. Last Saturday at the Hart Foundation Gala. His name is Marcus Delaney. He's 43, he works as a financial consultant out of Charlotte, and Dad, he actually listened. Like genuinely listened. Not waiting for his turn to talk, not checking his phone. He just listened. My heart did something complicated. Joy for her, sharp and real, because Diane had spent 3 years pouring herself into her career after a painful end to a relationship she'd never fully talked about. And beneath that joy, something smaller and quieter, a reflex I recognized from 36 years on the bench. The instinct that fires when someone describes something that sounds too good. I pressed it down. "Where'd you two end up talking?" I asked, keeping my voice easy. "High by the windows, overlooking the river." We were both at the silent auction. He made some comment about the bourbon being overpriced for a charity event, and I told him that was the whole point of charity events, and somehow that turned into 2 hours. She laughed a real laugh, warm and surprised at itself. He asked me about my work. Not the polite version, Dad. He asked follow-up questions. He wanted to understand what a cardiologist actually does on a Tuesday afternoon. "That's a good sign," I said carefully. And it was. It genuinely was. We exchanged numbers. He texted the next morning. Another pause, softer this time. I wanted you to know," I smiled. "I'm glad you told me. I meant it completely." But even as I spoke, I heard Eleanor's voice in the back of my mind, quiet and steady. "Trust, but verify. Especially with Diane." I reached for my pen. "Tell me about him. Where's he from?" "East Coast somewhere," he mentioned, growing up near the coast, but he moved to Charlotte about 16 years ago to build his practice. East Coast somewhere was not a specific answer. I noted it without reacting. "What firm does he consult for?" "He's independent. Works with small and mid-sized companies on acquisitions and financial restructuring. He said he prefers it that way, more flexibility, better client relationships. Independent consultant. No firm to verify. No colleagues to call." I kept my voice warm. "And he's never been married." A beat of hesitation. "No, he said he was waiting for the right person." Her voice went quiet at the edges when she said it, like she was being careful with something fragile. That detail landed in my chest and stayed there. 43 years old, financially stable, well-spoken according to Diane, charming enough to hold a cardiologist's attention for 2 hours at a charity event, and never once married. In 36 years on the federal bench, I had learned that a man in his 40s who had never committed to anyone usually fell into one of 3 categories. He was too consumed by his work to invest in another person. He had wounds he hadn't finished carrying. Or he was hiding something that made long-term relationships dangerous. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself that 36 years of hearing people lie under oath had made me allergic to trust in ways that weren't fair to apply to my daughter's personal life. "He sounds like he made quite an impression," I said. "He did." She exhaled, and I could hear the smile in it. "I know it's only been a week. I'm not reading too much into it. I wanted someone to know who understood why it matters." My throat tightened. Because I did understand. She was 34 years old, and she had spent the last 3 years building a career that she was genuinely proud of, filling her schedule so completely that there was no room left for the kind of loneliness that shows up at 2 in the morning when the apartment is quiet. She had wanted to tell someone who would be happy for her without immediately asking 20 questions about his financial history. I had just asked 3. "I'm happy for you, Diane," I said. "I mean that." "I know you do." A pause. "He wants to meet you. He said family matters to him and he wants to do things the right way." I leaned back in my chair and looked out the kitchen window at the dark south pasture, the fence line barely visible against the February sky. "Tell him to come to the ranch," I said. "We'll have dinner. Really." The relief in her voice hit me somewhere deep. She had been bracing for resistance. She had expected me to be cautious, to hedge, to make conditions. And maybe she was right to expect it. "Really?" I said. Any man who makes my daughter sound like that on a February Tuesday deserves a fair hearing." She laughed again, that real warm laugh, and we talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Her caseload, the ranch, a fence repair, Billy Tasker had been putting off since November. Normal things. Safe things. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time with my cold coffee and my property tax documents, and the silence of the ranch settling around me. Marcus Delaney, 43, independent consultant, East Coast unspecified, never married. I picked up my pen and wrote the name on the corner of a blank page. Then I sat there staring at it, while Eleanor's voice said what it always said: "Trust, but verify." I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. May arrived the way it always does in Tennessee. Sudden and generous, the redbuds already gone, and the oaks full green, the air thick with warmth that smells like cut grass and river water, and something just on the edge of sweetness. I had been up since 5 that Saturday walking the east fence line with Billy Tasker checking the cattle before the heat settled in. Billy is not a man who wastes words, which is one of the reasons I trust him. He pointed out 2 sections of fencing that needed attention, grunted something about the south pasture being overgrazed near the creek bend, and went back to the barn without another syllable. I appreciated that about him. Some mornings a man needs quiet more than conversation. By noon I had set the porch table, put a brisket on the smoker at 7, and changed into a clean shirt. Diane arrived first, driving down from Memphis in the late morning. She came through the front door with a container of her mother's cornbread recipe Eleanor's made from memory and set it on the counter without a word, the way people do things that carry meaning they don't want to say out loud. "He's 10 minutes out," she said, straightening her jacket in the hallway mirror. Her hands moved quickly, adjusting her collar twice when once was enough. She was nervous. Diane was never nervous. "He's going to be fine," I said. She looked at me in the mirror. "I'm not worried about him. I'm worried about you." Before I could answer, tires crunched on the gravel drive. Marcus Delaney stepped out of a dark green Ford F-1503, 3 or 4 years old, clean but not new. The kind of truck a man drives when he wants to appear unpretentious without actually being unpretentious. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of easy posture that comes from years of walking into rooms full of strangers and making them comfortable. He carried a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, 12-year expensive enough to show he had done his research on Tennessee culture, restrained enough not to look like he was trying too hard. He extended his hand and looked me directly in the eye. "Judge Callahan, thank you for having me. Diane talks about this place like it's the center of the universe." His grip was firm. His smile reached his eyes. He called me Judge, not Mr., not Robert, which meant he had looked me up. "Come on in," I said. We walked the property before the meal. The cattle pasture, the timber line, the stretch of river visible from the eastern rise. Marcus asked questions about the mineral lease agreement with Middle Tennessee Energy, about the timber harvest schedule, about whether the cattle operation was cow-calf or stalker. The right questions in the right order, using the right terminology. "You know ranching?" I asked. "I've consulted for a few agricultural operations in the Carolinas," he said smoothly. "You pick things up." Diane walked beside him, her shoulder occasionally brushing his arm. She was watching him the way people watch something they are afraid might disappear. It made my chest ache in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. We ate on the back porch as the afternoon light stretched long and gold across the south pasture. The brisket had come out right 12 hours on the smoker, the way Eleanor insisted was the only acceptable method, and Marcus complimented it with enough specificity to suggest he actually meant it. "This is the real thing," he said, cutting into the meat. Not the stuff they serve at those downtown Nashville places that charge $40 and pretend the smoke flavor is authentic. Diane laughed. I smiled and watched his hands. Over the meal, he talked about his consulting work. Charlotte-based independent practice advising small and mid-sized companies on acquisitions and restructuring. He referenced 2 deals in the Carolinas with enough detail to sound credible, not enough to be verified. He mentioned clients without naming them, confidentiality, he said, and that was reasonable. He described market trends with the kind of measured intelligence that signals competence without inviting challenge. He was good. He was genuinely, professionally good. And that was precisely what troubled me. In 36 years on the federal bench, I sat across from hundreds of witnesses who had prepared their testimony the way actors prepare a role. They knew their lines. They knew their blocking. They knew which emotional beats to hit and when. The ones who were lying were almost always more polished than the ones who were telling the truth, because truth doesn't require rehearsal, and deception does. Marcus Delaney never stumbled, never searched for a word, never contradicted himself, not even on small details. Every answer connected cleanly to the previous one like a chain of evidence assembled by someone who understood how cross-examination worked. At 7:15, his phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. He glanced at it, his expression calm. "Excuse me 1 second. Client on the East Coast, they forget about the time difference." He stood, walked to the far end of the porch, and turned his back to us. I watched him. His left hand came up and gripped the porch railing. His shoulders pulled inward, a posture I recognized from the witness stand, the involuntary contraction of a person receiving information they don't want. His free hand came up and cut through the air once, twice, short, sharp gestures. The gesture of a man giving orders, not managing an anxious client. His voice was too low to hear, but the body told the story clearly enough. Then he turned and caught me watching. What happened in the next half-second was the most honest thing I saw from Marcus Delaney that entire evening. A reset fast, practiced, nearly invisible. The tension left his shoulders. His hand dropped. His face rearranged itself into the easy, confident expression he had been wearing all afternoon. He walked back to the table and sat down. "Sorry about that," he said pleasantly. "Acquisition closing next week. Everyone panics at the finish line." "I know how that goes," I said. Diane smiled at him. He reached over and covered her hand with his, and she turned her palm up and laced her fingers through his. Without thinking about it, the automatic gesture of 2 people who had already built a physical shorthand. I looked away and picked up my glass. Later, after Marcus had driven down the gravel road and his taillights had disappeared into the dark, Diane found me on the porch with the last of the whiskey and the sound of the cattle settling in the south field. "Well?" she asked. Her voice was careful, steady, doing everything it could to sound like the answer didn't matter. "He's impressive," I said, and I meant it. She exhaled a breath she had been holding since the truck came up the drive. "But, but," I said. "If you're happy, I'm happy." She hugged me quick and tight and went inside. I sat alone in the dark for a long time, thinking about a man who reset his expression in half a second and never once let his guard down. Eleanor's voice came the way it always did, quiet and certain. "Trust but verify, Robert." I was still working on the second part. By August, Marcus Delaney had become a fixture at Cumberland Ranch, the way kudzu becomes a fixture on a Tennessee hillside, gradually, quietly, and then all at once until you look up one morning and realize it has covered everything you weren't watching closely enough. He visited most weekends. He helped Billy Tasker repair the south fence without being asked. He learned the names of the cattle dogs. He sat with me on the porch after dinner and asked about my years on the bench with the patient, focused attention of a man who was genuinely interested, or had practiced seeming so until the difference no longer showed. And when Diane told me his parents wanted to drive up from Knoxville to meet us both, I said yes before I had fully thought through what I was agreeing to. James and Ruth Delaney arrived on a Saturday afternoon in a well-maintained Buick SUV, dressed in the comfortable, unpretentious clothes of people who had spent their lives doing honest work and didn't feel the need to announce it. James was 67, broad through the shoulders, with a retiree's unhurried movement and a civil engineer's habit of glancing at the barn structure and the fence posts the way other men glance at a menu. Ruth was 64, warm-eyed and quick to smile, the kind of woman who makes you feel within 30 seconds that she has been looking forward to meeting you specifically. Judge Callahan. James shook my hand with a grip that said he respected the title without being intimidated by it. Marcus has told us so much about this place. I can see why. We brought peach preserves, Ruth said, pressing a jar into my hands with both of hers. Homemade. We've got a tree in the backyard that produces more than 2 people can ever eat. Diane lit up beside me. Oh, these are beautiful. Mom used to make these. Ruth's expression softened immediately. Marcus told us about Eleanor. I'm so sorry, honey. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. Diane's eyes went glassy for just a moment, that quick, involuntary shimmer that still catches her off guard when someone mentions her mother unexpectedly. She pressed her lips together and nodded. She really was. We ate lunch on the back porch. The conversation moved easily. James talked about his career with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, 32 years of bridge and highway projects across the state. Ruth described her classroom, 26 years of third graders, the kind of teaching career that leaves a permanent mark on hundreds of people who still remember her name. Marcus sat beside Diane, relaxed and attentive, occasionally adding a detail to his parents' stories, with the easy familiarity of a man among people he had known all his life, and that was precisely what bothered me. Not one story contradicted another. Not one detail required correction. Not one moment of the natural low-grade friction that exists in every real family, the gentle interruption, the affectionate disagreement, the story that gets embellished slightly differently each time it's told. James and Ruth moved through their afternoon with the smooth consistency of people who had reviewed their material and found it satisfactory. Ajay, tell me about Marcus growing up, I said, keeping my voice pleasant. What was he like as a kid? Ruth smiled, warm and immediate. Oh, he was a handful in the best way. Always into something. He spent one whole summer trying to build a go-kart in the garage with parts he found at the junkyard. She shook her head fondly. Never did get it to run. James chuckled. Spent more time on that go-kart than he ever spent on his homework. Marcus grinned. In my defense, the homework had less interesting engineering problems. Diane laughed and squeezed his arm. I smiled and noted that the go-kart story had the rhythm of something told many times before the setup. The punchline, the fond headshake. Polished smooth by repetition. After lunch, James walked with me through the east pasture while the women cleared the table. He asked intelligent questions about the mineral lease, about the timber harvest rotation, about whether I had considered adding a hay operation to reduce feed costs. His knowledge was specific enough to be credible, general enough never to be tested. You've got something real here, he said, looking out over the property. A lot of families let places like this go. It means something that you haven't. Eleanor and I built it together, I said. That makes it harder to let go of. He nodded slowly. Marcus talks about Diane the way a man talks about something he intends to keep, he said. I just wanted you to know that. As one father to another. I looked at him. His expression was open, sincere, fatherly in all the right ways. My chest tightened with something I couldn't name, cleanly part gratitude, part unease, the sensation of a man being told exactly what he wants to hear by someone who seems to know exactly what that is. "I appreciate that," I said. That evening, after James and Ruth had driven back toward Knoxville, their taillights disappearing down the county road, Diane hugged me in the driveway, with her whole self the way she used to when she was small, and something had gone exactly right. "Thank you, Dad," she said against my shoulder. This meant everything. I held her and said nothing, because what was I supposed to say that her future in-laws felt like a performance? I couldn't find the seams in that people who had just met me shouldn't know precisely how to make me feel comfortable. Later, well past midnight, I was crossing from the house to check on a heifer Billy had flagged as possibly calving early. I passed the east side of the barn. Marcus was standing in the shadows near the equipment door, his back-to-me phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low and clipped, and nothing like the easy, warm tone he used at the dinner table. "I already told you," he said, his voice sharp enough to carry. "Stop second-guessing the timeline. Everything is moving exactly the way it's supposed to move. You handle your end." I stopped walking. He hadn't heard me. I stood in the dark, close enough to hear the edge in his voice, not the frustration of a consultant managing a nervous client, but the cold authority of a man accustomed to giving instructions that don't get questioned. Then his boot scraped gravel as he turned. I moved before he could see me stepping back into the shadow of the fence line and waited until I heard him end the call and go back inside. I stood in the dark for a long moment, the night air warm and heavy around me, the cattle quiet in the south pasture, the ranch looking exactly as peaceful as it always had. I reached into my shirt pocket. The folded paper with Marcus Delaney's name on it was still there where I'd put it the night Diane first called. I hadn't unfolded it yet. I was beginning to think it was time. 3 weeks before the engagement party on a Sunday morning in March, my daughter opened a spreadsheet on her fiancé's laptop and watched her entire future rearrange itself in the space of 60 seconds. She didn't tell me that night. She didn't tell me the next day or the day after that. She carried it alone for 3 weeks, turning it over and over the way you turn something sharp in your hands, hoping to find an angle where it doesn't cut. She told me everything the morning after the engagement party, not once, but twice, because the second time through, she remembered details the first pass had shaken loose. But I am going to tell it the way she told it to me, because it is her story as much as mine, and because she described it with the precision of someone who had replayed every second 100 times in the dark, trying to find the version where it meant something different. Marcus had been staying at the ranch for the weekend. Sunday morning, he was in the shower. His laptop was open on the desk in the guest room, the screen still lit. Diane needed to look something up quickly, a patient medication interaction she wanted to double-check before her shift Monday morning. She crossed to the desk without thinking about it, the way people do when they have decided to trust someone completely, and trust has made them careless. She used his laptop the way she would have used her own. There were 4 browser tabs open. 3 were unremarkable. The 4th was an Excel file. The file name read cd_trust_liquidity_plan.xlsx. She told me later that she almost closed it, that her hand was already moving toward the tab when something in the file name stopped her, those 2 letters at the front. CD, her initials, Diane Callahan. She opened it. Column A listed asset categories. Real estate, $28 million. Investment accounts, $31 million. The Callahan Family Trust, $8 million. Mineral rights and timber holdings, $4 million. A total figure at the bottom of the column, $67 million. The numbers were exact. Not approximate, not rounded. exact. The kind of precision that requires access to documents, account statements, legal filings. The kind of research that takes weeks and a specific deliberate intention. Column B outlined transfer mechanisms. Trust modification. Co-trustee designation, meaning a second person added to the trust with equal authority to authorize transactions. Joint account access. Each mechanism listed with the specific legal instrument required to execute it. In Tennessee, as in most states, a family trust can be modified by the grantor or the current trustee. I had established the Callahan Family Trust 20 years ago and transferred sole trustee authority to Diane when she turned 30. That meant Diane and only Diane could authorize changes to the trust structure, including adding a co-trustee. A husband, for example, added after marriage would have the same legal standing as Diane herself to authorize fund transfers. The bank would process those transfers without question because both trustees of record would be signing. Column C outlined a timeline. A 30-day window post-marriage described in the spreadsheet with a phrase that made innocent explanations impossible before legal intervention can be initiated. You don't write that phrase if you're planning something legitimate. You write it if you're planning something that needs to be completed before anyone can stop you. At the top of the file in the header cell, 2 letters. CD Diane Callahan. She heard the shower turn off. I closed the laptop. She told me, her voice stripped down to the facts, because the facts were the only thing she could hold on to. My hands were shaking so badly I almost knocked it off the desk. I could hear him moving around in the bathroom. I walked to the window and stood there trying to breathe like a normal person. Marcus came out of the bathroom with his hair still damp towel around his waist, completely relaxed. He looked at her standing by the window and smiled that easy, confident smile. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I think I did." She kissed him. She made coffee. She sat across from him at the guest room table and talked about the engagement party catering and whether the string lights needed to go up on Friday or Saturday, and the whole time her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. When she finished telling me, standing in the wet grass of the south pasture, with the morning light just beginning to burn off the river mist, her jaw was set so tight I could see the muscle working in her cheek. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides, her knuckles pale. I kept trying to find a reason it wasn't what it looked like. She said, her voice cracking at the edges for the first time. Maybe it was a client file with similar initials. Maybe it was some kind of financial planning document his attorney prepared. I went through every explanation I could think of, Dad. Every single one. She pressed her lips together hard, fighting something back. None of them included the phrase, "before legal intervention can be initiated." You don't write that for a client. You write that when you're planning to steal something. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out with a cold instrument. $67 million. Every asset Eleanor and I had spent 40 years building, mapped out in a spreadsheet with a 30-day theft timeline. "Why didn't you call me?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. She looked up at me, and her eyes finally broke not a flood, but a single sharp, cracked tears spilling fast down both cheeks before she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "Because I was afraid I was wrong," she said, muffled against her own hand. "Because if I was wrong, I would have accused an innocent man and destroyed everything. And because—" She stopped, steadied. "Because I needed to be sure before I said it out loud. Saying it out loud makes it real." I reached over and put my hand on her shoulder. "It's real," I said quietly. "And we are going to deal with it. Together." She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her wrist jaw still tight. Something shifting behind her eyes from pain into something harder and colder and much more useful. It was the same look Eleanor used to get when she had made a decision and was done reconsidering it. I recognized it immediately. And for the first time since the night before, something in my chest unclenched just slightly, because whatever Marcus Delaney had built his plan around, he had badly miscalculated one thing. He had chosen the wrong family's daughter to target. April at Cumberland Ranch is the most beautiful month of the year, and I say that as a man who has watched 41 springs come through this property. The dogwoods bloom white along the fence line. The cattle move slow and easy through the south pasture. The evening air carries honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass, and the particular warmth of a Tennessee spring that makes you want to sit on the porch and believe the world means well. On the night of my daughter's engagement party, every bit of it felt like a stage set. By 7 o'clock, 65 guests had filled the back garden of Cumberland Ranch. String lights ran between the old oak trees, casting gold across the white linen tables. The caterers moved through the crowd with trays of appetizers, and the bar near the stone wall was doing steady business in Tennessee whiskey and sweet tea. Diane had spent 3 weeks planning this evening, down to the placement of the centerpiece flowers, and it showed the ranch had never looked more like the kind of place where good things happen to good people. Marcus stood near the center of it, all his arm around Diane's waist, laughing at something one of her colleagues from Memphis General had said. He was wearing a charcoal suit with a white shirt open at the collar, no tie relaxed, and commanding at once. He looked like a man who had already won and was gracious enough not to say so out loud. I stood at the edge of the porch with a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched and watched him work the room. I had been watching him for 3 weeks, differently than I had watched him before, since Diane told me about the spreadsheet. I wasn't watching for discomfort or hesitation or the cracks in his performance. I was watching for evidence. There is a difference, and 36 years on the federal bench had taught me to understand it precisely. By 8 o'clock, the party had reached its peak, conversations layering over each other, laughter rising into the warm air, the kind of noise that means people have stopped being polite and started being comfortable. I moved through the crowd at a deliberate pace, stopping to shake hands, accepting congratulations, asking about children and careers and summer plans. I spent 8 minutes talking with a cardiologist from Diane's hospital about the challenges of rural health care in Middle Tennessee. I spent 5 minutes with a neighbor from down the county road about hay prices. I spent 10 minutes talking with Marcus. He was standing near the bar when I found him momentarily separated from Diane while she made her rounds. He had a glass of bourbon in his hand and the easy, open expression of a man completely at home. Judge Callahan. He raised his glass slightly. You put together a beautiful evening. Diane put it together, I said. I provided the property and stayed out of the way. He laughed, that warm, genuine-seeming laugh I had heard dozens of times. That's the sign of a wise man, knowing when to contribute and when to let the capable people work. I smiled. Tell me something, I said, keeping my voice conversational. The mineral lease renewal coming up in October. Middle Tennessee Energy has been pushing for a 10-year extension. What would you advise on a deal like that from a consultant's perspective? Something moved across his face. Fast, almost invisible, the micro-expression of a man who has been asked a question one layer deeper than he prepared for. His eyes made a small adjustment, a recalibration. It lasted less than a second before the easy confidence reasserted itself. I'd want to see the current lease terms before advising anything specific, he said smoothly. But generally, 10-year commitments in mineral rights favor the lessee unless there's a strong escalation clause tied to commodity pricing. I'd push for a shorter initial term with renewal options. It was a reasonable answer. It sounded knowledgeable. But it was also a general answer, the kind you give when you've read enough to seem credible without knowing enough to be specific. I had seen that exact maneuver from expert witnesses for 3 decades. "Good point," I said pleasantly. "I'll keep that in mind." He excused himself to find Diane, and I watched him cross the garden with that unhurried, confident stride. At 8:47, I noted the time, because I have a judge's habit of noting times. Diane broke away from a cluster of her hospital colleagues near the rose arbor. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping twice to hug guests laughing at something. A neighbor said completely natural, completely composed. 3 weeks of carrying what she knew had given her a performer's discipline I had not expected, and could not help but admire. She reached me near the stone wall at the far edge of the garden. She wrapped both hands around my arm the way she used to when she was small and wanted to tell me something important. She leaned close, her cheek nearly touching mine, her lips at my ear. "Dad." Her voice was barely a breath, stripped down to pure urgency. "Call 911. Right now." Then she stepped back, turned toward a passing guest with a full and genuine-looking smile, exchanged a brief hug, and walked back across the garden to Marcus. She slipped her hand into his. She laughed at something he said. She tilted her head toward his shoulder for just a moment, the picture of a woman happily in love. I stood at the stone wall with my untouched whiskey and felt the words land in my chest like something dropped from a height. Not investigate. Not be careful. Not I need to talk to you later. Call 911. She had seen something tonight, something specific enough, something serious enough that her first instinct had been law enforcement. Not a conversation, not a confrontation. The police. I breathed in slowly through my nose. I straightened my jacket. I lifted my glass and took a small, measured sip because a man standing at the edge of his daughter's engagement party needs to look like a man enjoying his daughter's engagement party. Across the garden, Marcus caught my eye. He raised his own glass in a small, easy toast and smiled, warm, confident, the smile of a man who had thought of everything. I raised mine in return. For the next 40 minutes, I was the father of the bride-to-be. I shook hands and told stories and laughed at the right moments and asked after grandchildren by name. I was present and gracious and completely, deliberately unremarkable. And the whole time, beneath every word, my mind was running the way it ran during the worst trials, cold and fast and completely focused, sorting through what I knew and what I needed to know and exactly what I was going to do the moment the last car left my driveway. After the guests were gone and Marcus had walked Diane to the guest house, their voices fading into the dark beyond the timberline, I went inside. I locked the front door. I climbed the stairs to the study where Eleanor's photograph still sat on the corner of the desk, the one taken 6 months before her diagnosis, her in the south pasture, laughing at something off camera, the late afternoon light catching in her hair. I sat down and looked at her face for a long time. "You knew," I said. "You saw something in him before he ever set foot on this property, didn't you?" That's what the promise was for. The photograph didn't answer, but I heard her anyway. Trust, but verify Robert, especially with Diane. Tomorrow morning I was going to start verifying everything. The morning after the engagement party, Cumberland Ranch looked exactly the same. Same cattle moving slow through the south pasture. Same mist sitting low over the river. Same light coming gradual and gray over the timberline to the east the way it had come every morning. For the 41 years I had been watching it. The world had not adjusted its appearance to account for what I now knew was happening inside it. I had been awake since 3:30. I gave up on sleep at 4:15, dressed in the dark, and went downstairs to make coffee. I stood at the kitchen window with my mug and watched the guest house across the yard, its windows dark, and thought about the man sleeping inside it, who had spent the better part of 2 years preparing to steal everything Eleanor and I had built. At 5 o'clock, I picked up my phone and typed a text to Diane. South pasture. Now. Alone. Her reply came in 4 minutes. On my way. She appeared at the back gate 7 minutes later, barefoot, a barn jacket pulled hastily over her pajamas, her hair loose and uncombed. She had not slept either. I could see it in the set of her face, in the way she moved across the wet grass, with the careful, deliberate step of someone operating on pure adrenaline and will. We didn't speak until we had walked the full length of the south fence line and reached the far corner, where the property met the old creek bed, far enough from the guest house that Marcus would see only 2 figures walking in the early light, a father and daughter sharing a quiet morning before the world woke up. Diane stopped and turned to face me. She crossed her arms over her chest, her jaw tight, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She had been crying before she came out. She was done crying now. Tell me everything, I said. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out. She took a breath that shook slightly on the way in and steadied on the way out. Then she began. She told me about the laptop, the open tab, the file name with her initials, the columns of numbers that added up to $67 million, mapped out with a precision that required access she had never given him. She told me about standing at the guest room window trying to breathe, while Marcus dried his hair in the bathroom 10 feet away. She told me about 3 weeks of searching for an explanation that didn't make her sick to her stomach. Then she told me what she had seen at the party. He put his phone down on the cocktail table. She said, her voice flat and controlled. Face up. He does that sometimes when he's in a conversation, sets it down so people know he's not distracted. But last night he put it down while he was talking to Dr. Hensley from the hospital, and I was standing 2 feet away, and the screen lit up with a notification. I watched her face carefully. What kind of notification? A photo confirmation. From his camera app. She pressed her lips together hard for a moment. The thumbnail was small, but I could see enough. It was a document. A legal document from what I could tell. The letterhead looked like it was from your study, the same cream paper you use for estate files. My chest went cold. He photographed documents from my study. That's what it looked like. Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly before she pulled it back. I don't know when. He's been in the house alone twice in the last month while I was at the hospital, and you were out on the property. I didn't think anything of it. I trusted him, Dad. The last 3 words came out raw and jagged like something torn. I trusted him completely. I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She stood there absorbing the contact, the way a person absorbs something they need but aren't sure they deserve. You trusted him because he was designed to be trusted, I said. That's not a failure of your judgment. That's what he does. She looked up at me, eyes glassy but fierce. What do we do? Do we call 911 right now? Do we confront him? No, I said immediately. We do not confront him. Not yet. Dad, listen to me. I kept my voice low and steady. If Marcus is what I think he has done this before. He is a professional. The moment he suspects, we know he will be in his truck and down that driveway before we can finish a sentence. He will cover his tracks, change his identity, and find his next target. We will never see him again, and we will never be able to prove what he planned to do. Diane stared at me. A muscle worked in her jaw. So I have to keep pretending. Yes, I said. I know how hard that is, but right now the only advantage we have is that he believes we are still in the dark. The moment that changes, we lose everything. She turned away from me and looked out over the south pasture, the cattle moving slow in the early mist. The ranch spread out in the gray morning light exactly as it had always looked. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "How long?" she asked. "As long as it takes to build a case that puts him in a federal courtroom," I said. "I am calling our estate attorney this morning. Then I am calling an investigator, someone who does this professionally. We find out who Marcus Delaney really is, what he has done before, and we build evidence that holds up. Then we move." She was quiet for a moment, staring at the fence line. Then she turned back to me, and her expression had shifted, the raw pain still there underneath, but overlaid now with something colder and harder and entirely purposeful. "He was going to marry me on a Saturday," she said. "Sign the documents on a Friday, rob us on a Monday, and smile at me the whole time." "Yes," I said. "That appears to be the plan." Her chin came up. "Then let's make sure it's the last plan he ever runs." Across the yard, a light came on in the guest house kitchen window. Marcus awake, starting his morning. He moved past the window, coffee mug in hand, and glanced out toward the pasture. He saw us standing by the fence. He raised his mug in a small, cheerful wave. Diane raised her hand and waved back. Her face was warm and easy and gave away absolutely nothing. I lifted my hand and waved too. 20 minutes later, Marcus was at my kitchen table eating scrambled eggs and talking about whether the summer wedding in December would need outdoor heaters on the terrace. He was charming and relaxed and completely certain that everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. He had no idea that the two people sitting across from him had just decided to dismantle him. Marcus left the ranch at 10:30 Monday morning. He loaded his overnight bag into the dark green F-150, hugged Diane on the front porch for a long moment, with his chin resting on top of her head, and shook my hand with that firm, steady grip I had been studying for 11 months. He said the weekend had been perfect. He said he was already looking forward to the wedding. He drove down the gravel road, and I watched his taillights until the tree line swallowed them completely. I was on the phone before his dust had settled. The first call went to Patricia Odom. Pat had been the Callahan family's estate attorney for 18 years, a sharp, precise woman of 53 who wore red suits to depositions because she said it made opposing counsel underestimate her, and she had never once been underestimated twice. She answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the brisk efficiency of someone already 3 items deep into their Monday. "Robert, what's wrong? I need to understand something about the family trust," I said. "Hypothetically." A pause. Pat knew me well enough to understand that I never asked hypothetical questions. "Go ahead." "Diane gets married? Her husband is added as co-trustee. How fast can assets be moved?" The pause this time was longer. When Pat spoke again, her voice had dropped half a register, the shift from attorney to ally. "The Callahan Family Trust was established under Tennessee Code. Diane became sole trustee at 30. You no longer carry signing authority, Robert, which means you cannot unilaterally block a modification she initiates." She stopped. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "Just answer the question, Pat." With proper documentation, trust modification form, co-trustee designation, the marriage certificate establishing legal standing. A co-trustee can authorize wire transfers within 48 to 72 hours of being added to the account. First Tennessee Bank processes trustee transactions the same day they're submitted if the paperwork is in order. The bank has no legal obligation to delay or investigate a transaction executed by 2 trustees of record. Her voice went very flat. By the time you could initiate legal intervention, the money would already be in a jurisdiction we can't touch. $67 million, I said. In 3 days. I heard Pat exhale sharply. Robert, tell me everything. I told her about the spreadsheet, about the columns of numbers, about the phrase before legal intervention can be initiated, about the photo notification on Marcus's phone at the engagement party, about 11 months of a performance so polished it had fooled everyone in this family except Eleanor, who had been gone for 3 years and had somehow still seen it coming. When I finished, Pat was quiet for 4 full seconds. I want to hurt him, she said, and it was the first time in 18 years I had heard her sound anything other than composed. Then her voice steadied. I have a contact at the FBI, Financial Crimes Division, Nashville Field Office, Agent Brenda Kowalski. She is thorough, she is aggressive, and she will want this case. But she needs evidence, Robert. Real evidence. Not a spreadsheet Diane saw for 60 seconds and a thumbnail photo. I'm hiring an investigator, I said. When I have proof, I'll call you. Move fast, Pat said. If this man is working a timeline, you are already behind it. The second call went to Victor Haynes. I had met Victor 15 years earlier during a federal investigation into a tax fraud scheme that had touched 4 states and 17 shell companies. He had been with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, at the time a forensic accountant with a gift for following money through structures designed specifically to prevent it from being followed. He had left the IRS 8 years ago and built a private practice that was discreet, expensive, and worth every dollar. He answered his cell on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying the unhurried calm of a man who had heard urgent requests before and knew better than to match their energy. Victor Chanki, I said. I need a full background investigation. Everything. Name, Marcus Delaney, 43 years old. Claims to be a financial consultant based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Says he grew up on the East Coast, no specific state. Independent practice, no firm affiliation. Never been married. No visible social media presence beyond a LinkedIn and 1 personal profile set to private. What's the timeline? Victor asked. My daughter is marrying him in 10 weeks. She found a spreadsheet on his laptop 6 days ago outlining a plan to steal $67 million from the family trust within 30 days of the wedding. Victor didn't respond immediately. I heard the sound of a pen moving. Clean surface presence or genuinely clean. Too clean, I said. His digital footprint looks like it was built rather than lived. No employment gaps, no old photos, no trail of complaints. 2 LinkedIn recommendations from accounts I can't verify. Everything exactly right. That's a constructed identity, Victor said. It wasn't a question. How thorough do you need? I need to know who he actually is, what he has done before, and anyone working with him. I need evidence that holds up in a federal courtroom. Thorough is 10 days. I can push it to 3 on the critical leads identity verification prior operations known associates. The deeper financial trail takes longer. 3 days on the critical leads, I said. Call me the moment you find anything. Understood. A pause. Judge Callahan, if this man is what you're describing, he has done this before. People like this don't build this kind of operational sophistication on their first attempt. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, I said. I ended the call and stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and the Monday morning silence of the ranch around me. The coffee had gone cold. Out the window, Billy Tasker was moving the cattle from the south pasture to the east field, his truck trailing a slow dust cloud along the fence line. Ordinary. All of it perfectly ordinary. I spent the next 3 days conducting my own research, the kind a cautious father might do nothing that would raise flags. I searched Marcus Delaney, Charlotte, North Carolina in every combination I could construct. His professional website was clean and restrained the work of someone who understood that too much polish looked suspicious. His LinkedIn profile showed a steady career trajectory. 2 quotes in Charlotte area business publications, both offering commentary on acquisition trends, without saying anything specific enough to be tested. No complaints. No litigation history. No former associates who had posted anything negative. No gaps that showed. No trail that led anywhere uncomfortable. Real people have messy digital histories. They have old posts they regret, and employment gaps they explain awkwardly, and professional disagreements that surface in unexpected places. Marcus Delaney had none of that. He had a profile, not a history. On the third evening, I was sitting on the porch with a glass of water and the property tax documents I still hadn't finished when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in 14 months. Dennis Farrow. My hand tightened on the phone. Dennis was a former colleague from my courthouse years now, running an independent legal consulting practice in Nashville. We talked a few times a year the way men do when they've worked alongside each other long enough to trust each other's judgment without needing to explain why. I answered before the second ring finished. Dennis. Robert. His voice was careful, tense in a way I recognized immediately. I saw the engagement announcement in the Tennessee Bar Association newsletter this morning, the photograph of Diane and her fiancé. A pause that lasted just long enough to mean something. I think I know that man, and if I'm right, you need to hear this tonight. I have presided over hundreds of trials in 36 years on the federal bench, and I have learned that the moment a case breaks open rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It doesn't arrive with raised voices or a sudden confession. It arrives as a phone call on a Tuesday evening while you're sitting on your porch watching the light go flat across the south pasture. It arrives quiet and ordinary, and then it changes everything. Dennis Farrow's call arrived at 6:47 that Tuesday evening, 3 days after the engagement party. I had known Dennis for 22 years. We had overlapped on the bench for a decade before he left to build his consulting practice in Nashville. He was methodical, precise, and constitutionally incapable of drama. When Dennis Farrow called something urgent, it was urgent. "Tell me what you saw," I said. "And the Tennessee Bar Association sends out a monthly newsletter," Dennis said. Announcements, retirements, notable events. This month's edition had a photograph from the engagement party. Someone submitted it, probably one of Diane's colleagues from the hospital legal department. A pause. The man standing next to Diane. I've seen that face before, Robert. Different hair, different glasses, but the same face. The same way of standing. The same smile. My hand tightened around the phone. Where? Knoxville, 2 years ago. I was consulting on a commercial real estate transaction, a partnership deal involving a mixed-use development on the north side of the city. The other party brought in a consultant named Daniel Reeves. He was supposed to be facilitating the financial structuring. Charming, well-prepared, knew enough terminology to sound credible. Dennis's voice hardened. Something felt wrong to me from the beginning. Same thing you described with Marcus, too smooth, never surprised, answered every question perfectly, but never went deeper on his own. I started pulling on his references. They didn't hold up. His previous employer turned out to be a company that existed only as a registered LLC with no actual operations. His educational credentials listed a finance degree from a university that confirmed no record of his enrollment. I stood up from the porch chair without consciously deciding to. What happened? Before I could build a full case, he disappeared. Stopped returning calls. The deal collapsed. My client lost $180,000 in preparation fees, legal costs, and earnest money he could not recover because the partnership documents had been structured in a way that insulated Reeves from personal liability. Dennis exhaled sharply. My client was 61 years old, Robert. He had put that money together over 3 years. He didn't lose his home, but it was close. Are you certain it's the same man? I pulled the newsletter photograph up on my screen and set it next to the security badge photo my client had taken of Reeves. At their first meeting standard practice for his firm, they photographed every external consultant. Dennis's voice was completely flat. Same jawline, same eyes, same way the left side of his mouth pulls slightly higher than the right when he smiles. I am certain. I walked to the edge of the porch and stood there with the evening air warm against my face and the cattle moving in the south pasture below and the full weight of what I was hearing settling onto my shoulders like something physical. Daniel Reeves, I said. Knoxville, 2 years ago. There may be more names, Dennis said. This kind of operation constructed identity-targeted approach disappear before charges can be filed. That takes practice, Robert. You don't build that skill set on your first or second attempt. I have an investigator running his background now, I said. I'm calling him tonight with this. Good. A pause. Robert. How is Diane? I looked out at the ranch, the fence line Eleanor had walked on Sunday mornings, the timber line going dark against the evening sky. The guest house sitting quiet across the yard, where Diane was right now sitting through a phone call with Marcus about wedding flowers while carrying the weight of everything she knew. She's stronger than anyone should have to be, I said. She gets that from her mother, Dennis said quietly. After I ended the call, I dialed Victor Haynes immediately. He answered on the first ring. I was about to call you, Victor said, his voice carrying an urgency I had not heard from him before. I have something, but you go first. I gave him everything Dennis had provided. Daniel Reeves, Knoxville, 2 years ago. The constructed employer. The fraudulent credentials. The deal that collapsed. The $180,000 a 61-year-old man had lost and could not recover. Victor was quiet for a moment. I could hear the sound of typing. That matches a pattern I've been building on my end, he said. I've been running Marcus Delaney through federal databases, state court records, and financial fraud registries. There is no Marcus Delaney in Charlotte with his described background. No tax records, no professional licensing filings, no business registrations. The identity was created approximately 4 years ago, using a combination of synthetic documents and legitimate records belonging to a real Marcus Delaney, a retired schoolteacher in Gastonia, North Carolina, who is 67 years old and has never worked in financial consulting. The porch felt unsteady under my feet. He stole a real person's identity. He borrowed enough of it to construct a plausible surface, Victor said. Social security number variation, same first and last name, different date of birth. Enough to pass a casual background check. Not enough to survive a forensic one. More typing. The Daniel Reeves identity in Knoxville, I'm cross-referencing it now. Same construction method. Different borrowed base identity, same technique. How many names are we looking at? In 6 days, I've confirmed 3 separate identities tied to the same biometric profile, Marcus Delaney Daniel Reeves, and a third name I found in a Georgia financial fraud complaint from 18 months ago. Ryan Colton. A woman in Savannah filed a complaint with the Georgia Secretary of State's office alleging that a financial consultant named Ryan Colton had defrauded her elderly father in a securities investment scheme. The complaint was investigated and closed when Colton could not be located. Victor paused. Her father lost $240,000. He was 64 years old. I sat down on the porch steps because my legs made the decision before I did. 3 names, 3 confirmed operations, 3 families. Victor. My voice came out rougher than I intended. How long has this been going on? Based on what I have so far, at least 5 years. Possibly longer. He stopped typing. Judge Callahan, there is something else. The Georgia complaint included a detail I want you to hear before I continue. Tell me. About the woman who filed the complaint, her name was Caroline Marsh, 26 years old at the time, a law student. Victor's voice was careful, precise. Her father's name was Daniel Marsh. After he lost the money, his business collapsed. He lost his home. 6 months after Ryan Colton disappeared, Daniel Marsh took his own life. The words hit me like a physical impact, a sharp, cold pain spreading outward from the center of my chest. A father, a real father. A man who had worked his whole life to build something, who had welcomed the wrong person into his family's trust, who had lost everything and seen no way forward, who had left his daughter alone to carry all of it. That could have been me, if Diane hadn't found that spreadsheet, if she hadn't trusted me enough to walk out to the south pasture that morning and tell me the truth. Caroline Marsh, I said. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Where is she now? She finished law school, Victor said. She is currently practicing as a fraud attorney in Louisville, Kentucky. A pause. And she has been hunting the man who destroyed her father for 3 years. Before I tell you what Victor found, and I warn you, this changes everything. Comment the word justice so I know you're still with me. What he uncovered about this man's past will break your heart before it makes you furious. A heads up, the next part of this story contains some fictional elements. If that's not for you, feel free to step away now, no hard feelings. Victor Haynes called on the 6th day at 11 in the morning. I was standing in the east pasture checking the fence line Eleanor used to walk on Sunday mornings, the same stretch of old cedar posts and wire that ran along the creek bed toward the timber line, the ground still soft from the rain 2 nights before. I had taken to walking it every day since the engagement party, the way some people pace when they cannot sit still. The cattle ignored me. The fence didn't need checking. I needed somewhere to put my hands while I waited for the world to finish rearranging itself. My phone buzzed. Victor Haynes. Tell me, I said. His name is not Marcus Delaney, Victor said. It is Owen Garrett, born in Cookeville, Tennessee in 1982, 43 years old. I have his birth certificate, his original Social Security number, and his juvenile record from Putnam County. A pause. There is no Marcus Delaney. There never was. Owen Garrett created that identity 4 years ago using documentation techniques I have seen in 2 previous federal fraud prosecutions. My knees buckled. I grabbed the top wire of the fence with my free hand and held on. Owen Garrett, born in Cookeville, a Tennessee man. He had known this land from the inside, the culture, the speech patterns, the correct way to compliment a brisket and ask about a mineral lease and shake a former judge's hand. He hadn't been performing Southern credibility. He had been using his own. Keep going, I said. 5 years ago, Owen Garrett ran his first confirmed operation under the name Ryan Colton in Savannah, Georgia. You already know about Daniel Marsh. What I can add is the full picture. Victor's voice was careful the way it gets when the information is bad enough to deliver slowly. Daniel Marsh had built his furniture manufacturing company over 32 years, 180 employees, a reputation across 4 states. After his wife passed, he had poured everything into the business and into his daughter. Owen had come in through Caroline the same way he came in through Diane: patience, credibility, the slow construction of trust. The money was gone before Daniel understood what had happened. The business collapsed, I said. Within 4 months, Daniel lost the company, the building, his retirement accounts, and eventually his home. He spent 6 months trying to find Ryan Colton through every channel available to him. Lawyers, private investigators, state authorities. Nothing. Victor stopped. On a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months after Owen disappeared, Daniel Marsh drove to Percy Warner Park in Nashville, sat down on a bench overlooking the valley, and took a lethal dose of his heart medication. A park ranger found him 3 hours later. He left a letter in his jacket pocket addressed to Caroline. It said he was sorry. It said he had failed her. I let go of the fence wire and sat down in the wet grass between the cedar posts. The phone pressed to my ear, the east pasture stretching out around me in the morning light. A man I had never met. A father who had loved his daughter and welcomed the wrong person and lost everything and decided the only thing left to do was disappear. That letter in a jacket pocket on a park bench. That could have been me, if Diane hadn't opened that laptop, if she hadn't trusted me enough to walk out into the cold grass and say it out loud. Victor. My voice scraped coming out. What else? 2 years ago, Owen ran the Daniel Reeves operation in Knoxville, the one your colleague Dennis identified. Before he could complete it, Dennis started pulling on his references, and Owen cut and ran. No money taken that time, but the operational structure was identical. Victor paused. And 18 months ago, Owen ran a larger operation in Chattanooga under the name Nathan Shaw. The target was Linda Hargrove, 38 years old, daughter of William Hargrove, a commercial real estate developer worth approximately $90 million. What happened? Owen and Linda were together for 14 months. He proposed. They set a wedding date. 3 weeks before the ceremony, William Hargrove hired his own investigator after noticing irregularities in Linda's account activity. The investigator found enough to confront Owen privately. Victor's voice hardened. William Hargrove paid Owen Garrett $3.5 million to sign a non-disclosure agreement, divorce Linda, and disappear. He wanted to protect Linda from the publicity of a fraud prosecution. The fury that moved through me was cold and precise, not hot. He paid him. $3.5 million, Victor said. Wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands within 72 hours of the NDA being signed. William Hargrove told my contact that he regretted it every day. He said paying Owen off was the worst decision he ever made. A beat. Because it didn't stop him. It funded him. And it sent him to his next target, Diane. Owen Garrett had taken $3.5 million from a man trying to protect his daughter, and he had used it to finance the operation against mine. Is he working alone? I asked. No. Victor's tone shifted, something new coming. I traced the legal documentation used in the Chattanooga operation to a paralegal in Calgary, Alberta. Her name is Sandra Pruitt, 47 years old. Former paralegal at an estate planning law firm, she specialized in trust law and estate administration. She left the firm 3 years ago under circumstances the firm won't discuss. No reference letter, no severance announcement. He paused. She is currently listed as a freelance legal consultant, but has no verifiable clients. Her income flows through a shell company registered in Alberta called Pruitt Advisory Group. Owen Garrett is listed as a silent co-owner under a variant of his birth name. She prepares the documents, I said. What about the parents? I asked. James and Ruth Delaney. They came to the ranch in August. They knew specific things about this family, about Eleanor. They felt real. Victor was quiet for a moment. I ran them separately. James and Ruth Delaney are a retired couple from Knoxville. They are real people. Owen found them through a theatrical talent agency that advertises background work and character roles. He paid them $4,000 each to play his parents for the afternoon. The go-kart story, the peach preserves the comment about Marcus at the dinner table, all scripted. A pause. They did not know the full nature of what they were participating in. Owen told them he was surprising a girlfriend's family as part of an elaborate proposal setup. One of them may be willing to testify. The cold that moved through me then had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Trust modification forms, offshore transfer instructions, co-trustee designation paperwork. She is the legal infrastructure of every operation Owen runs. Victor's voice dropped slightly. I accessed 3 months of email correspondence between them, Robert. I need you to hear what they say about Diane. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. Read them, Victor read. The first email was from 6 months ago. Sandra to Owen Target confirmed. CD Diane Callahan. Estimated liquid assets $67 million. Trust structure reviewed. Sole trustee since age 30. Perfect setup. The second was from 2 months ago. Owen to Sandra engagement party April. Wedding 10 weeks after. Timeline is clean. Have the documents ready. The third was from last week, 4 days before the engagement party. Sandra to Owen trust modification forms prepared. Signature points identified. Page 4, co-trustee authorization. Page 7, grantor approval. Once both signatures obtained, I submit to First Tennessee Bank Monday morning. Wire transfers complete by Tuesday afternoon. Lisbon account confirmed. I was on my feet. Without knowing, I had stood up pacing the east fence line in the wet grass, the phone so tight against my ear I could feel my pulse in my jaw. Robert. Victor's voice was steady. I have enough for the FBI. Financial conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, interstate fraud. This is a federal case and it is solid. But Agent Kowalski will want to catch them in the act. The rehearsal dinner is 8 weeks away. That is the moment. 8 weeks. 56 days of watching Owen Garrett sit at my kitchen table and smile at my daughter. Send everything to Patricia Odom tonight, I said. And Victor find out who else knew. He had information about this family he could not have obtained without help from someone close to us. Someone gave him Diane's schedule. Someone told him about the trust. A pause. I'll keep digging. I ended the call and stood in the east pasture with the morning light on the grass and Eleanor's fence line running away from me toward the timber and the knowledge of what a man named Owen Garrett had done to a father named Daniel Marsh sitting in my chest, like a stone I would carry for the rest of my life. I made myself a promise standing there in the wet grass. This ends with us. Patricia Odom called at 3 o'clock that same afternoon. I was still at the kitchen table with Victor's documents spread in front of me, printouts of Owen Garrett's constructed identities, the email correspondence between Owen and Sandra Pruitt, the financial trail connecting 3 destroyed families to the man who had been sitting on my porch, drinking my whiskey and asking about my mineral leases. I had been reading through it for 2 hours, the way I used to read case files the night before a difficult trial. Slowly, completely, until every detail was fixed in my memory, and I understood not just what had happened, but why each piece connected to the next. My phone buzzed. Patricia, you're Robert, she said, and her voice carried something I had not heard from her before, a tight, controlled urgency that told me she had been sitting on this call for as long as she could stand to. Victor sent me everything an hour ago. I've reviewed it. The FBI case is solid conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft across multiple states. Interstate fraud elevates all of it to federal jurisdiction. She paused. But there is someone who needs to speak with you first. She called my office this morning. Her name is Caroline Marsh. My chest tightened. Daniel Marsh's daughter. She saw the engagement announcement in the Tennessee Bar Association newsletter. She recognized Owen's photograph immediately. Patricia's voice dropped slightly. She has been looking for him for 3 years, Robert. She says she has documentation from the Georgia investigation that could strengthen our case. She wants to talk to you directly. Give me her number, I said. Caroline Marsh answered on the second ring. Her voice was young, she was 29 years old, but it carried a weight that had nothing to do with age. It was the voice of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had learned to walk straight under it. But Mr. Callahan, she said, I've been staring at that photograph for 6 hours trying to decide if I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. And then I decided it didn't matter whether I was sure. I had to make the call. You were right to call, I said. Tell me what you know. She told me about her father the way people tell stories they have rehearsed 1,000 times in their own heads, trying to find the version that hurts least. Daniel Marsh had built his furniture company from a single workshop in a rented garage in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He was the kind of man who showed up to Caroline's bar exam results, to every Tuesday evening phone call, to every moment that mattered. That was what Owen Garrett had destroyed. Not just a business. A father who showed up. He was the kind of father who showed up, who called on Tuesday evenings for no reason, who drove 4 hours to Louisville when Caroline had her bar exam results and wanted someone to celebrate with. He was a good man, Caroline said, and her voice cracked on the last word before she pulled it back hard. He was just a good man who trusted the wrong person because he wanted good things for me. Owen targeted him through me. I introduced them. I thought Ryan Colton was genuine. I thought, she stopped, steadied. I thought he was the real thing. You had no reason to suspect otherwise, I said. Owen Garrett is a professional. This is what he does. I know that now. Her voice hardened, the grief compressing into something sharper and more purposeful. I became a fraud attorney because of what he did. I have spent 3 years building a file on him, partial identity matches, victim testimonies, financial records from the Georgia complaint. I found the Knoxville case 18 months ago, but by the time I got there, he had already run. A pause. I have been 6 months behind him for 3 years, Mr. Callahan. Until this morning. Oh, you are not behind him anymore, I said. I heard her exhale a long, shaking breath that carried 3 years of accumulated weight releasing all at once. How is your daughter? Angry, I said. Scared. But she is the one who found the evidence. She is the reason we are having this conversation. Your father didn't get that chance, Caroline said quietly, and I understood she was not talking about me. She was talking about Daniel, about what it would have meant if he had found the spreadsheet first. If he had walked out to a fence line with his daughter and decided to fight back instead of sitting alone with the weight of what had been taken from him. No, I said. He didn't. And I am sorry for that, Caroline. More than I can say. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady and clear. I want to be there when you take him down. I want to see it. You will, I said. I promise you that. After the call, I sat in the study with Eleanor's photograph on the desk and thought about Daniel Marsh driving to Percy Warner Park on a Tuesday morning in October. A father who had loved his daughter and lost everything and could not find a way to keep going. I thought about Caroline, 26 years old, coming home from law school and finding a letter in her father's handwriting. Then Patricia called back. She had been on the phone with Agent Brenda Kowalski at the FBI Nashville field office while I spoke with Caroline. Brenda reviewed Victor's package, Patricia said. She wants to move. The plan is the rehearsal dinner catch Owen and Sandra in the act with documents in hand. She is sending 2 agents to meet with you at the ranch tomorrow morning. A pause. Robert, She said to tell you this is one of the cleanest conspiracy cases she has seen in 12 years. Owen Garrett is going to federal prison. The only question is how long. Long enough? I said. Make sure it's long enough. That evening, I drove to Memphis and sat across from Diane in a corner booth at a diner 3 blocks from the hospital, away from anyone who might know us. I told her everything: Owen Garrett, Sandra Pruitt, the emails, Caroline Marsh, the FBI. I laid it out the way I used to lay out a case for a jury: facts, first sequence, second, meaning last. Diane listened without interrupting. Her coffee went cold in front of her. When I finished, she looked at me across the table with her jaw set and her eyes bright and fierce, and said, 8 weeks. 8 weeks, I confirmed. She nodded once, sharp and final. Then let's make sure every single one of those 8 weeks counts. 8 weeks sounds like a long time until you are living inside them. Agent Brenda Kowalski arrived at Cumberland Ranch the morning after my call with Patricia, driving a plain sedan with Tennessee plates and the efficient, unhurried manner of someone who had been building federal cases since before Diane finished medical school. She was 46, sharp-eyed with close-cropped dark hair and the particular stillness of a person who has learned that the best interrogation technique is simply to wait. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, and she walked me through the operational plan with the precision of a surgeon, explaining a procedure she had performed dozens of times. We let them believe everything is proceeding on schedule, she said, spreading a floor plan of Opryland Grand Hotel across the table. Sandra Pruitt will arrive at the hotel the day before the rehearsal dinner and check in under her consulting firm's name. She will present herself to Owen as a legal advisor, helping with post-marriage estate planning, her cover for bringing the documents. Our surveillance confirms she has done this in at least 2 previous operations. Kowalski tapped the floor plan. You will wear a digital recorder here, breast pocket, left side. Battery runs 6 hours. Everything you hear, we hear in real time from a support vehicle in the parking structure. She looked at me directly. When you have verbal confirmation of the plan, both of them discussing the documents and the transfer, you text me 1 word. Now, my team enters within 60 seconds, and if they separate, I asked. You follow Owen. He is the primary. Sandra will not run without him. Kowalski folded the floor plan. Judge Callahan, I need to ask you something directly. Can you sit across from this man for 8 more weeks without showing him what you know? I thought about 36 years of listening to testimony from people who had done terrible things and showing them nothing but the measured attention of the bench. Yes, I said. I can do that. Good. She gathered her documents. Because the moment he suspects anything, he runs. And if he runs, he rebuilds, and he finds someone else's daughter. Owen came to the ranch the following weekend, and the weekend after that, and every weekend for 8 weeks. He helped Billy Tasker replace the east barn door that had been warping since February. He sat on the porch after dinner and talked about the wedding venue's catering menu and whether we should add a second bartender for the reception. He asked about the mineral lease renewal with the easy interest of a man who expected to have an ongoing stake in the outcome, and every time he smiled at me across the dinner table, I smiled back. The performance cost Diane more than she ever said out loud. I watched it happen week by week, the way she laughed at his jokes a half-second later than she used to, the way her hand sometimes tensed slightly. When he took it, the way she looked at me across the room in the quiet moments with an expression that said she was still in there, still holding, still counting down. She never broke. Not once. Not in front of him. But I found her twice in the kitchen after Owen had gone to bed, once standing at the sink with the water running and her forehead pressed against the cabinet door, her shoulders shaking without sound. The second time, she was sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a cup of tea she hadn't touched, staring at nothing. Both times I sat down beside her, and neither of us said anything that needed to be said out loud. Owen brought up the trust on the 5th weekend. We were clearing the dinner table when he said casually and pleasantly, "After the wedding, we should probably sit down with a financial planner. Make sure the estate structure is set up optimally for both of you." I set down the plate I was carrying and looked at him. "That's Diane's decision," I said evenly. "The trust is hers." He smiled completely unruffled. "Of course. I just mean I want to make sure she's protected going forward. That's all I've ever wanted." The word protected landed the way it always did, with a weight that had nothing to do with its stated meaning. "She's well protected," I said pleasantly, and went back to clearing the table. 1 week before the rehearsal dinner, Jessica Harmon came to the ranch. She had been Diane's closest friend since their first year at Vanderbilt, and she had been helping with wedding preparations for months. She found me in the vegetable garden Eleanor had planted along the south wall of the house, and pulled me aside with her hands twisting together in front of her, and her face tight with guilt she had been carrying for longer than that morning. "Judge Callahan," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I need to tell you something. I should have said it months ago, and I didn't, and I'm so sorry." She pressed her lips together hard. "I saw things about Marcus, the way he was always stepping away for phone calls, the trips that never quite added up, the questions he asked about the ranch and the trust and the estate questions that felt like more than just getting to know the family." Her eyes filled. "I asked Diane about it once. She said I was being paranoid, so I stopped asking." A tear broke loose and she wiped it away fast, angry at herself. "I should have pushed harder. I feel like I failed her." I put my hand on her shoulder. "You are telling me now," I said. "That matters." "What can I do?" she asked. "Tell me what I can do." "Come to the rehearsal dinner," I said. "Sit with Diane. When this is over, she is going to need the people who showed up." Jessica nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand, pulling herself together with visible effort. 7 days. Owen Garrett would arrive at Oprahland Grand Hotel in 7 days, believing he was 48 hours from the cleanest score of his career. Sandra Pruitt would be in room 412 with documents she had spent 3 years perfecting, and I would be walking into that hotel with a recorder in my breast pocket and 36 years of patience that had never once failed me when it mattered most. Eleanor's voice came as I walked back through the garden toward the house, quiet and certain the way it always was. "Trust, but verify, Robert." I had verified everything. Now it was time to act. I arrived at Oprahland Grand Hotel at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 hours before the rehearsal dinner. Victor Haynes met me in the lobby near the fountain, dressed in a gray sport coat that made him look like any other Nashville businessman checking in for a conference. He shook my hand, pressed a small device into my palm, matte black the size of a car key, and spoke without looking at me directly. "Battery runs 6 hours, he said. "Already active. Everything in range of your left breast pocket transmits in real time to Kowalski's vehicle in the parking structure." He paused. "You ready for this?" I slipped the device into my jacket pocket and felt its weight settle against my chest, directly over my heart. "Been ready for 8 weeks, I said. By 7 o'clock, 42 guests had gathered in the private dining room on the hotel's second floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Oprahland atrium beyond the indoor waterfall. The lush garden paths, the warm light that made everything look softer and more certain than it was. The room smelled of fresh flowers and roasted chicken, and the particular anticipation of people who believed they were celebrating something real. Sandra Pruitt had checked into room 412 that afternoon, under the name of her shell consulting firm. Agent Kowalski had confirmed it at 4 o'clock with a text that contained one word, confirmed. Owen arrived at 6:45. He walked through the dining room door in a dark navy suit, his hair neat, his posture easy, and went straight to Diane. He took both her hands, kissed her cheek, looked at her the way a man looks at something he has worked very hard to acquire. Diane smiled back at him, with her whole face warm, open, entirely convincing. 8 weeks of practice had made her extraordinary. I watched from across the room and felt something fierce and protective rise in my chest. I found Owen at the bar 20 minutes into the evening. He was talking to one of Diane's colleagues from the hospital, laughing at something the man had said completely at ease. He saw me approach and raised his glass. "Judge Callahan." His smile was warm. "You clean up well for a cattle rancher." "I had a good reason tonight," I said, accepting the glass of bourbon the bartender handed me. I looked at him directly. "How are you feeling, big weekend?" "Couldn't be better." He took a sip of his drink. "2 more days, and she's mine forever." The word mine landed with a precision he didn't intend. At 8:30, Owen stood to give the rehearsal dinner toast. He raised his glass, looked around the room with that practiced warmth, and let his eyes settle on Diane at the center of the table. "When I spent a long time believing that some people simply don't get what they deserve," he said. His voice was smooth and genuine sounding, and every word was a lie. Then I met Diane, and I understood that sometimes if you're patient enough and careful enough, you get exactly what you've been working toward. He lifted his glass higher. "To Diane, to family, to everything that's about to begin." The room applauded. Glasses rose. Diane touched her glass to his and smiled. I raised mine and thought, "You have no idea how right you are about getting exactly what you've been working toward." At 8:52, Owen excused himself. He leaned close to Diane, murmured something about a client call, kissed her forehead with practiced tenderness, and walked toward the hallway that led to the elevators. I watched him go. I waited 4 minutes, long enough that no one would connect my departure to his. Then I excused myself quietly, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and moved down the carpeted hallway toward room 412. I heard them before I reached the door. Sandra Pruitt's voice was clipped and professional, stripped of anything resembling warmth. "I have the modification forms here. Trust Amendment Page 4, Co-Trustee Authorization under your name as her spouse. Page 7, Grantor Approval, Diane's signature line. Once both signatures are obtained Saturday evening, I submit the package to First Tennessee Bank Monday morning when they open." Timeline after submission. Owen's voice was calm, satisfied. The voice of a man watching pieces fall into place. "Monday submission, Tuesday morning confirmation from the bank," Sandra said. "Tuesday afternoon, the funds transfer to the intermediary account in Delaware. By Tuesday evening, they move to the Lisbon account. We fly out Tuesday at 2. A pause. "By Wednesday morning, $67 million will be distributed across 11 shell accounts in 4 jurisdictions. Even with FBI involvement, international asset recovery takes 3 to 5 years minimum. By the time Robert Callahan understands what happened, we are gone, and the money is untraceable." "And the old man?" Owen asked. Sandra made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Robert Callahan hasn't had signing authority on that trust since Diane turned 30. He has no legal standing to block or reverse a co-trustee transaction executed with proper documentation. There is nothing he can do. I had everything I needed: the plan, the timeline, the bank, the account structure, the acknowledgement that both of them knew exactly what they were doing and exactly who they were doing it to." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. One word. Now. I sent it. Then I did something Agent Kowalski had not planned for. I knocked on the door. Maybe it was 36 years of needing to see the moment a verdict was delivered. Maybe it was the part of me that was not a judge but a father, the part that had watched his daughter shake without sound at a kitchen sink for 8 weeks and needed Owen Garrett to understand face to face that the person he had underestimated most was standing on the other side of this door. The door opened. Owen's expression moved through surprise calculation and something colder in the space of 2 seconds. Sandra stood behind him at the desk, the documents spread across the surface, her face going rigid. Diane stepped into the doorway beside me. Then Jessica, one step behind. Owen looked at Diane. Something crossed his face, not guilt, but the specific recalibrating expression of a man who has just discovered that the asset he planned to take has been watching him the entire time. Diane, he started. Don't, she said. Her voice was so steady it cut the air cleanly. Don't say my name like that. Not anymore. 60 seconds later, Agent Kowalski came through the door with 2 agents behind her badges, raised voices clear and official and final. It was over. Almost. Agent Kowalski moved through the room with the efficient calm of someone who had done this many times and understood that speed and precision mattered more than drama. Owen Garrett. She said badge raised her voice, carrying the particular authority of federal law enforcement. In the moment it stops being procedural and becomes final. Also known as Marcus Delaney, Daniel Reeves, Ryan Colton, and Nathan Shaw. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, interstate fraud, and attempted grand larceny. She turned to Sandra. Sandra Pruitt. Arrested as primary accomplice, conspiracy, forgery, and wire fraud. Same charges, same jurisdiction. 2 agents moved forward with handcuffs. Sandra said nothing. Her face had gone the color of old concrete, her jaw set hard, her eyes fixed somewhere past the wall. The documents on the desk, the trust modification forms, the co-trustee authorization papers, the transfer instructions for First Tennessee Bank, were collected into evidence bags by a 3rd agent working quietly and methodically. Owen did not resist the handcuffs. He stood with his wrists behind his back and looked at Diane with an expression that had shed every layer of the performance, leaving something stripped and cold underneath. Then he looked at me. You want to know who I am, he said. His voice was quiet. Not angry, quieter than anger, which was worse. My real name is Owen Garrett. I was born in Cookeville, Tennessee, 43 years old. He held my gaze steadily. And 15 years ago, you sentenced my brother to 12 years in federal prison. The room contracted. I searched my memory the way I had searched it 1,000 times over a career, methodically, without rushing, moving through the catalog of cases that had defined 3.5 decades on the bench. Federal fraud cases, wire fraud, conspiracy, Tennessee defendants. Then it came. Thomas Garrett. 2010. A wire fraud and securities conspiracy case out of Middle Tennessee. Thomas had been 30 years old, a financial services rep who had defrauded elderly clients of their retirement savings through a series of fictitious investment funds. The evidence had been overwhelming and meticulously documented. I had denied his appeal twice. He had been sentenced to 12 years at a federal correctional facility in Kentucky. Thomas Garrett, I said. Owen's expression shifted. Something moved through it that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived somewhere between them. You remember. I remember the case, I said. I did not know he had a brother. Nobody knew. Owen's voice stayed level, controlled, but there was something beneath it now, a pressure that had been building for 15 years, looking for a place to go. Thomas was 8 years older than me. He raised me after our mother got sick. He was the only family I had. His jaw tightened. You denied his appeal. Twice. You sat up on that bench and you decided his life wasn't worth a second look. I denied his appeal because the evidence was conclusive, I said. He defrauded 23 retired people. Some of them lost everything. He died in that prison. Owen's voice cracked for the first time, a single fracture quickly sealed. Year 5. Cardiac event. He was 35 years old. The facility's medical response was inadequate. By the time they treated him, it was too late. I got a phone call from a corrections officer I had never met telling me my brother was gone. He exhaled sharply. I had no money for a proper burial. I had no family left. I had nothing. Diane stood in the doorway with her arms crossed tight over her chest, her face unreadable. Jessica had her hand on Diane's arm, fingers pressing gently. Sandra stepped forward from where the agent had positioned her, her voice flat and stripped of everything except the fact of it. Victor Haynes found the connection, I assume. She didn't wait for an answer. Our father was Patrick Garrett. He abandoned Owen's mother when Owen was 6 years old. He abandoned my mother when I was 8. 2 families he walked away from without looking back. He built his legitimate life and left both of us with nothing. Her eyes moved to me with a contempt that had been aged for years. Owen found me through a DNA registry in 2016. We recognized each other immediately, not just by blood, by what had been done to us. She looked back at Kowalski. Wealthy families with their perfect estates and their family trusts. They reminded us of everything that was taken. So we took from them. Kowalski stepped between them and me. That's enough. She nodded to the agents. Take them out. Owen was turned toward the door. Then he stopped, not resisting, just stopping for the space of one breath, and looked back at me over his shoulder. Ask yourself something, he said, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear it clearly. I am good at what I do, Judge Callahan, but I am not good enough to find your daughter's schedule, your trust structure details, and your family's financial records on my own from Charlotte, North Carolina. His eyes were steady and cold and completely certain. Someone gave me everything I needed. Someone close to this family wanted this to happen. You caught me. He paused. But you haven't found them yet. Then the agents walked him through the door and down the hall, his footsteps fading into the thick carpet of the Opryland corridor until the sound disappeared entirely. The room felt suddenly emptier than its square footage explained. Diane crossed the room in 3 steps and pressed her face against my shoulder. For the first time in 8 weeks, she didn't have to perform anything. The shaking started immediately, not loud, not dramatic, just the deep, involuntary trembling of a body releasing 8 weeks of sustained tension all at once. I put both arms around her and held on. It's done, I said against her hair. Is it? She said, muffled against my jacket. He said someone gave him everything, someone who knew us. I looked at Victor Haynes over Diane's shoulder. He was already on his phone, his expression focused and tight. He met my eyes and gave a single nod that meant I heard it. I'm already looking. Agent Kowalski returned from the hallway, her face carrying the controlled gravity of a case that had just developed a new dimension. We have them both in custody. Sandra will be processed tonight. She looked at me directly. What Garrett said about an inside source, we take that seriously. I'm opening a secondary investigation effective immediately. There's something else, I said. He mentioned a name before they arrested him at the bar. He implied someone with institutional knowledge. Someone who knew this family before he ever arrived in Memphis. Kowalski nodded slowly. I'll need you to walk me through every person who had access to your trust documents, your family schedule, and your financial structure in the last 4 years. Everyone. Even people you trust completely. I stood in the hotel room with my daughter still trembling against my chest, and the evidence bags being sealed on the desk, and the question Owen Garrett had left hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that wasn't entirely out. Someone close to this family had wanted this to happen. I needed to find out who. We were back at Cumberland Ranch by 9:30. Diane sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier, staring at the middle distance with the particular exhaustion of someone whose body has finally stopped running on adrenaline and doesn't know what to replace it with. Jessica sat beside her close enough to touch, not saying anything that didn't need to be said. I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the dark south pasture and thought about Owen Garrett being processed at the federal holding facility in Nashville, and I thought that it was finished, and I thought that Eleanor would have known exactly what to say right now, and I missed her with a sharpness that surprised me even after 3 years. My phone rang at 10:47. Agent Kowalski, I answered before the second ring completed. Mr. Callahan. Her voice was tight and controlled in the way that means the information is bad, and the professionalism is working hard to contain it. Owen Garrett escaped federal custody during transport to the holding facility. He attacked the transport officer at a traffic stop on Briley Parkway, approximately 4 miles from the hotel. The officer is injured, but stable. Owen fled on foot into the tree line along the interstate. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. We have a regional manhunt underway. FBI, Tennessee State Police, Metro Nashville, Robertson County Sheriff. But I need you to secure your property immediately. He knows where you live, he knows the layout of the ranch, and he has nothing left to lose tonight. The kitchen felt like it shrank by half. I turned from the window. Diane was already looking at me. She had heard enough of the call from across the room to understand. Her face went pale under the kitchen light, her hands tightening around the cold mug until her knuckles went white. He's coming here, she said. Not a question. We don't know that, I said, which was true but not reassuring. He's coming here, she said again, and her voice was steady in the way that comes not from calm, but from having already processed the worst possibility and decided to stand in it anyway. I locked every door and every ground floor window while Jessica stayed with Diane in the kitchen. 2 Robertson County Sheriff's deputies arrived 18 minutes after Kowalski's call, one positioned at the front gate, one at the back porch near the terrace. I told Diane to go upstairs to her old room and lock the door and not open it for anyone but me. She looked at me for a long moment before she went. Be careful, she said. Please, I've been careful for 68 years, I said. Tonight is not the night that changes. She went upstairs. I heard the lock turn. I sat in the study with the lights off, looking out at the ranch in the dark. The south pasture was quiet. The timberline to the east was a solid black mass against a sky with too many clouds for stars. The guest house sat dark across the yard where Owen had slept dozens of weekends while planning to steal everything inside this house. 10 o'clock, 11, 11:30. The ranch was silent except for the heating system and the occasional low sound of cattle settling in the south field, and the creak of old timber framing doing what it had done for 40 years. At 11:48, I heard it. Not outside, inside. Below me from the direction of the east barn, the working barn where Billy Tasker kept the equipment, and where I maintained a small fireproof safe bolted to the concrete floor that held estate documents, account records, and emergency property files. Owen had been in that barn. He had helped Billy replace the door in May. He knew exactly what was in there. I moved through the house without turning on lights, took the back stairs, crossed the dark kitchen, and went out the side door into the night air. The deputy at the back porch was on the far side of the terrace. I could see his flashlight moving along the fence line. I crossed the yard to the east barn in 30 seconds, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The barn smelled of motor oil and hay, and the particular darkness of a space that hasn't had its lights on in hours. I hit the wall switch. Owen Garrett stood at the far end of the barn near the safe, his back to me, his hands working at the combination lock. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was torn at the shoulder and streaked with mud and what looked like blood from a cut above his left ear. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the accumulated cost of a night that had destroyed 15 years of planning in the space of 2 hours. He spun when the lights came on. His eyes were wild in a way I had never seen from him before. The careful, controlled performance entirely gone, leaving something raw and cornered underneath. "Stay back," he said. His voice was ragged. "The deputies are 30 yards away," I said, keeping my voice level. "You are not leaving this barn, Owen. I just need the account numbers." His voice cracked on the last word, desperation breaking through. "The files in that safe, the estate records. I can still get out. I can still—" "It's over," I said. It was over the moment Diane opened that laptop in March. Something shifted in his face. The wild desperation collapsed inward, and what replaced it was a grief so old and so heavy it looked like it had been living behind his eyes for years, waiting for a moment like this to surface. "You took everything from my family," he said, his voice dropping to something almost quiet. "Thomas was all I had. He raised me. He was 22 years old when our mother got too sick to work, and he held everything together with nothing. He made one bad decision, and you buried him for it." His chin came up, trembling. "He died in that prison because the medical staff didn't move fast enough. He was 35 years old, and he died alone in a Kentucky correctional facility, and you never even knew his name until tonight." My chest ached with something complicated that was not sympathy for what Owen had done, but was undeniably grief for what had been done to him a long time ago by a series of failures that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with the ordinary cruelty of systems that process human beings without always remembering they are human. I knew Thomas Garrett's name," I said quietly. "I knew his case, and I am sorry for what happened to him after my courtroom. I am not sorry for the sentence." Owen lunged. He came fast and desperate toward the safe, both hands reaching. I stepped directly into his path, not to stop him physically, but to plant myself between him and the door, between him and any exit, the way a man stands when he has decided that this ends here and not somewhere else. He hit my shoulder hard, both of us stumbling, and I grabbed the nearest thing, the frame of the equipment shelf, and went down with him, my weight pinning his arm against the concrete floor long enough to matter. It was not graceful. It was 68 years old, and anger and the specific stubbornness of a man who had been waiting 8 weeks for this moment. I got my mouth open. "Now East Barn!" I heard boots on gravel at a dead run. The door burst open, and 2 deputies came through it, fast crossed the barn floor in 4 strides, and had Owen by both arms before either of us had fully gotten back to our feet. He was cuffed for the second time in 3 hours, his face against the concrete. The fight finally gone out of him completely. As they dragged him toward the door, Owen turned back to me. His face was bleeding from where it had met the barn wall. His eyes were burning. "Harrison Webb," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Former Chief Judge, Middle District of Tennessee. He paid me $180,000 Callahan. He gave me everything: Diane's schedule, the trust structure, your financial records. He wanted you to feel exactly what I felt. A breath that shook on the way out. You caught me, but Webb is the reason I found you. The deputies pulled him through the door. I stood alone in the east barn, blood on my shirt, from where the struggle had torn through the fabric. My hands steadying themselves against the wall, the name Harrison Webb settling into my chest, like the final piece of a structure I had been building without knowing its shape. Harrison Webb. I knew that name. I went back inside and sat at my desk, with my hands still unsteady blood, drying on my shirt collar Eleanor's photograph, watching from the corner of the desk, the way it always did, patient, steady, present. Harrison Webb. I typed the name into my laptop and waited 4 seconds for the results to load. Former Chief Judge, United States District Court, Middle District of Tennessee. Appointed 1998. Served 14 years. Forced to resign in 2017 following an internal judicial conduct investigation into allegations of improper financial relationships with attorneys appearing before his court, specifically accepting paid consulting arrangements through a shell company from 2 law firms whose cases he had ruled on favorably over a period of 6 years. The investigation had been triggered by a confidential complaint filed with the Judicial Council of the Sixth Circuit. The complainant's name had never been made public, but I knew who it was. I had filed that complaint in January of 2017 after reviewing case records that crossed my desk through a judicial review committee I served on that year. The pattern had been unmistakable: the same attorneys, the same favorable rulings, the financial structures just opaque enough to survive casual scrutiny, but not the scrutiny of a former JAG officer who had spent 36 years reading evidence with the specific intention of finding what people tried to hide. I had reported it because it was the right thing to do. I had reported it knowing it would cost Webb everything: his position, his reputation, the legacy of 14 years on the federal bench. I had not enjoyed it. I had not hesitated. Harrison Webb had lost everything because I told the truth about what he had done, and he had spent 8 years deciding how to make me pay for it. I called Victor Haynes at midnight. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. "Webb," I said. "I've been running his financials for the last 2 hours." Victor said, his voice carrying the tight focus of a man deep in a trail of numbers. "Webb Consulting Group, LLC, registered in Delaware in 2019. Sole listed officer is his wife, Margaret Webb. 3 wire transfers from Margaret Webb's personal account to a shell company called Garrett Advisory Services, $60,000 each, spread 18 months apart, totaling $180,000. The first transfer was dated 4 months after Owen Garrett created the Marcus Delaney identity." Victor paused. "The payments align exactly with the 3 phases of Owen's operation against your family: initial reconnaissance, relationship establishment, and final execution phase." My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached. "He funded every stage." "He funded every stage," Victor confirmed. "And he provided the intelligence Owen couldn't have gathered from Charlotte. Diane's hospital schedule, the trust structure, details the financial account numbers, the engagement party date 6 months in advance. Webb had sat on the bench when you established the Callahan Family Trust, and at that time he still moved in the same legal circles as your estate attorneys. Patricia Odom confirmed it this afternoon 18 years ago. Webb and the senior partner at her predecessor firm attended the same judicial conference in Memphis for 3 consecutive years. Trust structures, beneficiary details, asset summaries, the kind of information that flows in professional conversations between attorneys and judges who consider themselves colleagues. He did not steal the documents. He did not need to. He simply listened over years to people who trusted him with information they had no reason to protect. Everything else he compiled afterward through Owen's reconnaissance. He didn't just want the money, I said. No, Victor said. He wanted to watch you lose your daughter the way he lost his career. He wanted you to feel responsible. He wanted you to know you couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. A pause. The money was Owen's incentive. The destruction was Webb's. I sat in the dark study for a long moment. After Victor finished Eleanor's photograph, the only light source in the room, the ranch silent outside the windows. 8 years. Harrison Webb had spent 8 years engineering a revenge so elaborate and so patient that it had taken a spreadsheet accidentally left open on a laptop to stop it. I thought about Daniel Marsh, sitting on a park bench in Percy Warner Park, with a letter in his jacket pocket. I thought about Caroline Marsh coming home from law school to find her father gone. I thought about Linda Hargrove and the $3.5 million her father had paid to make Owen disappear, not knowing it would only redirect him. All of it. Every destroyed family. Every stolen year. Partially funded and directed by a man who had sat on the federal bench for 14 years and decided that when the system held him accountable, the appropriate response was to build a private one. At 6 o'clock the following morning, Agent Kowalski called. FBI agents executed a search warrant at Harrison Webb's residence in Brentwood at 5:45 this morning, she said. Webb was taken into custody without incident. His wife Margaret is being interviewed separately. We have the financial records, the wire transfers, the communication logs between Webb and Owen Garrett going back 3 years. Her voice was steady and precise. He wrote a confession last night before we arrived, Judge Callahan. Handwritten 4 pages. He left it on his kitchen table. What does it say? Kowalski read the relevant section. Webb's handwriting, according to her, was careful and deliberate, the penmanship of a man who had signed judicial orders for 14 years. The confession said, I hired Owen Garrett to make Robert Callahan feel the loss of everything he valued the way I lost everything I had built. He reported my conduct and destroyed my career. I wanted him to understand what that felt like. I wanted him to know that the things we build can be taken from us by the decisions of people who believe they are righteous. I sat with that for a moment. What are the charges? I asked. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial authority under federal statutes that apply to former officers of the court. Kowalski paused. His attorney will argue mitigating circumstances given his age, he's 71. But the paper trail is clean and the confession is voluntary. He is going to federal prison, Robert. After the call, I drove to Memphis and met Caroline Marsh at a coffee shop near the courthouse where she worked. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands around a coffee cup, her back to the wall, the way people sit when they have learned to keep exits in view. She stood when she saw me, and I shook her hand, and we sat down. I told her about Webb, about the payments, about the confession, about Owen's arrest and Sandra's processing, and the charges that would move through the federal system in the coming months. She listened without speaking. When I finished, she looked down at her coffee for a long moment. A tear dropped onto the back of her hand, and she looked at it like it had surprised her. My father would have been 67 this year, she said quietly. He would have had a garden by now. He always wanted a garden. She pressed her lips together. He never got one because Owen Garrett needed money, and Harrison Webb needed revenge, and nobody thought about what it would cost a furniture maker from Murfreesboro, who just wanted good things for his daughter. I know, I said. And I am sorrier for that than I know how to say. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red, but her voice was clear. Will you be at the sentencing? Every one of them, I said. She nodded slowly. Then she said something I was not prepared for. "Thank you for not paying him off," she said. "William Hargrove paid Owen to disappear, and it sent him straight to my father. You didn't do that. You built a case. You did it the right way." She exhaled. "That matters. It really does." I drove back to Cumberland Ranch in the early afternoon, the Tennessee hills green on both sides of the highway, the sky wide and clear and indifferent the way it always is. Harrison Webb had spent 8 years planning to make me feel like I had failed my daughter. He had not counted on Eleanor's foresight, or Diane's courage, or the particular stubbornness of a 68-year-old former judge who had spent his entire career refusing to look away from the truth. August at Cumberland Ranch is the fullest month. The cattle are heavy from summer grass. The timber stands dark and deep along the eastern ridge. The heat breaks each evening into something almost cool, and the sky over the river goes colors that Eleanor used to try to describe, and finally gave up on saying some things were better witnessed than explained. It had been 8 months since the arrests. The legal outcomes had come in waves through the summer, the way verdicts do not all at once, but one after another, each one closing a door that had been standing open too long. Owen Garrett received 15 years in federal prison. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy assault on a law enforcement officer, the charges stacked cleanly, the evidence airtight, the recorder from my breast pocket, delivering every word from room 412 with the clarity of a confession freely given by a man who had believed he was already finished. He stood at sentencing without expression, his eyes finding mine once across the courtroom and then moving away. I did not look away. Sandra Pruitt received 8 years. Conspiracy, forgery, wire fraud. She said nothing at sentencing. Her attorney argued diminished agency, that Owen had been the architect and she the instrument. The judge disagreed. She had drafted the documents. She had sent the emails. She had known exactly what she was building and for whom. Harrison Webb received 7 years. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial authority under federal statutes governing former officers of the court. He was 71 years old, and his attorney argued for leniency on grounds of age and prior service. The prosecutor read aloud from Webb's own confession. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to lose everything, and the courtroom went very quiet. The judge sentenced him to 7 years and recommended no early release consideration for the first 4. Caroline Marsh attended Owen's sentencing. She sat 3 rows behind me, straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a specific moment and has decided to be fully present for it. When the sentence was read, I heard her exhale a single long breath that carried 3 years of weight, releasing all at once. Afterward, she found me in the courthouse hallway. My father would have been glad. She said, her voice steady and clear. Not happy, I don't think he was a man who found happiness in punishment, but glad that it was named, that it was counted. She squeezed my hand with both of hers. Thank you, Robert. Partial restitution from the seized Webb and Garrett accounts was awarded to the estates of Daniel Marsh and the other confirmed victims. It would not return what had been taken, but it was recognition, a court's formal acknowledgement, that what had been destroyed had value, that the people destroyed had mattered. Diane's healing moved through the summer, the way the Cumberland River moves after heavy rain, fast in some stretches, slow in others, occasionally doubling back on itself before finding the right channel forward. She took 6 weeks of medical leave after the arrests. She walked the ranch in the mornings. She went back to therapy twice a week with a counselor in Nashville she trusted. She called me every evening, sometimes talking for an hour, sometimes just needing to hear a familiar voice for 10 minutes before she went to sleep. By June, she was back at Memphis General part-time. By July, full-time. In August, she called me on a Tuesday evening, an ordinary Tuesday, no particular occasion, and her voice carried something I recognized immediately because I had been listening for it for months. It was the same lightness I had heard the night she first called me about Marcus Delaney. But this time it was real, unperformed. Hers. I want to bring someone to the ranch, she said. For Sunday dinner. His name is Michael Barlow. He's 37, he works in watershed restoration for the state of Tennessee, and Dad, he doesn't talk about himself very much. He mostly asks questions, and then actually listens to the answers. I smiled. Bring him Sunday, I said. I called Victor Haynes the next morning out of old habit. He called back that afternoon. Clean record, stable career, genuine references. A man who was exactly who he said he was, with a history that had been lived rather than constructed. Michael Barlow arrived Sunday afternoon, driving a sensible truck carrying a jar of local honey from a farm near his office in Cookville. He shook my hand and called me Judge Callahan without being told, because Diane had mentioned it, and he had paid attention. He asked about the mineral lease renewal and listened to the answer without redirecting toward himself. He laughed at Diane's jokes without trying to top them. After lunch, Diane caught me watching them from the porch. She crossed the yard, climbed the porch steps, and stood beside me. She slipped her arm through mine the way she had since she was small enough to reach my elbow. I know you ran a background check, she said. Old habits, I said. She laughed warm, real surprised at itself. Thank you, she said quietly. For all of it. For believing me when I came to you. For not letting me face it alone. I covered her hand with mine. Your mother knew this day would come, I said. She made me promise to be ready for it. Diane looked out over the ranch, the cattle in the south pasture, the timber line going copper in the afternoon light. The east fence line where Eleanor used to walk on Sunday mornings thinking things through. Do you think she knew it would be this bad? Diane asked. Oh, no, I said. But she knew you would need someone standing beside you, and she knew I needed a reason to pay attention. I paused. She was right about both. That evening, I walked the east fence line alone at sunset the way I had every evening since coming home to this ranch full-time. The light turned the hills gold. The cattle moved slow and easy. The timber stood dark and patient along the ridge. I stopped at the corner post, the old cedar one Eleanor used to touch with her hand when she turned around to walk back. I closed my eyes and listened to the ranch settle into evening, and I heard her voice one last time, clear and certain and at peace. You kept your promises, Robert. Both of them. Now rest. I opened my eyes. The light was fading over the timberline, turning the sky the colors Eleanor could never find words for. I stood there until it was dark, and then I walked home. I am 68 years old, and I have learned more from this chapter of my life than from 36 years on the federal bench. God gives us instincts for a reason. That quiet voice that whispers when something feels wrong, the one I almost talked myself out of listening to that voice, was a gift. Don't silence it the way I nearly did. If this grandpastory's experience taught me anything, it is this: love is not weakness, but love without discernment is a door left unlocked. You can welcome people into your life and still pay attention. You can trust deeply and still verify carefully. These two things are not opposites. They are partners. Don't make the mistake I almost made waiting too long to act on what you already know, telling yourself you are being paranoid, telling yourself the people you love deserve happiness more than they deserve protection. They deserve both, every single time. This revenge story was never really about revenge. It was about a father keeping two promises to the woman he loved. It was about a daughter brave enough to say 4 words that saved everything. And it was about the truth that justice, however long it takes, is always worth building carefully. To every parent watching, your instincts matter. Your presence matters. This grandpastory's moment reminded me that dad revenge is simply this refusing to let someone destroy what you promised to protect. If this revenge story moved you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel, because the next story is already waiting for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the very end. A final note. Upcoming stories contain fictional elements crafted for educational purposes. If this type of content isn't your preference, feel free to explore other stories that speak to your heart instead.